In 1871, in Odessa, on the shore of the Black Sea, the first pogrom, which is a Russian word for violent mass attack, broke out due to a national reaction against the success of so-labeled useful Jews. The Jewish quarter was looted and burnt. This began a new wave of pogroms, blood libels, and mass transfers of Jews. In 1881, the Jews were blamed for the assassination of Tsar Alexander II and all the ills of Russian civilization. Pogroms descended on many towns within the Pale of Jewish settlement, leaving tens of thousands of Jews without homes or means of livelihood. In 1882, they continued, with a priest stirring up a crowd of peasants to murder and persecute the so-labeled Christ killers. The concentration of Jews within the Pale was intensified towards the end of the century. According to the author Martin Gilbert, 500,000 were transferred to new towns in 1882. By 1891, the Pale had absorbed 700,000 living east of it, and 250,000 along the western frontier. By 1897, 5 million Jews lived there, with only 320,000 outside. Only sympathetic minds can translate these eviction statistics into the enormous burden of human suffering they truly represent. Clearly something needed to be done to relieve these Jews. Events outside Russia were also to help stir people into action. Persecutions in Greece followed the defeat in 1821 of the Turks, who had tolerated the Jews. In 1839, Jews were forcibly converted to Islam in Persia. In Damascus in 1840, they were falsely accused of murdering a monk and his servant to obtain blood for Passover bread. Jews were arrested and tortured. 2 died. International pressure caused the Sultan to release the remaining Jews, but persecutions and murders continued in Arab lands. As opportunity afforded, Jews began to immigrate to Palestine, where the rule of the Turkish Sultan was less intolerant. The idea of Palestine as a home for the Jews began to be discussed. Moses Montefiore, a British Jew, tried to give practical expression to this by buying up land in Palestine for Jewish settlers. Englishmen Charles Churchill in 1842 and George Gawler in 1845 supported the creation of this national home as the only solution to the chronic problem. In 1848, a man named John Thomas from America lectured throughout Britain on the hope of the Bible. His expositions were published in his book Elpis Israel, meaning the hope of Israel, which, amongst other things, had this to say on the Jewish question. There is, then, a partial and primary restoration of Jews before the manifestation, which is to serve as the nucleus, or basis, of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes, after he has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-advential colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate thither as agriculturists and traders in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth, but more immediately of getting rich in silver and gold by commerce with India, and in cattle and goods by their industry at home, under the efficient protection of the British power. This is all that is needed, namely, security for life and property, and Palestine would be as eligible for Jewish emigration as the United States have proved for the Gentiles. But to what part of the world shall we look for a power whose interests will make it willing, as it is able, to plant the ensign of civilization upon the mountains of Israel? I know now whether the men who at present contrive to foreign policy of Britain entertain the idea of assuming the sovereignty of the Holy Land and of promoting its colonization by the Jews. Their present intentions, however, are of no importance one way or the other, because they will be compelled by events soon to happen to do what, under existing circumstances, heaven and earth combined could not move them to attempt. The present decisions of statesmen are destitute of stability. A shooting star in the political firmament is sufficient to disturb all the forces of their systems and to stultify all the theories of their political astronomy. The finger of God has indicated a course to be pursued by Britain which cannot be evaded, and which her councillors will not only be willing, but eager to adopt when the crisis comes upon them. I shall have occasion to refer to John Thomas again, but it is sufficient here to draw attention to the remarkably clear perception he had of future events as a result of his understanding of Bible prophecy. The Eastern European Jews, in their desire for relief, looked more and more towards emigration, both to the United States and also, significantly, to Palestine. A German Jew, Kalisha, a rabbi, traveled Europe advocating the return to the land of Israel and helped set up an organization in 1860 for that purpose. In 1862, Moses Hess, another German Jew, published his book titled Roman Jerusalem, in which he took up Kalisha's proposal. Hess had been strongly affected by the Damascus affair, previously described. As mentioned in videos in my first playlist, Hess correctly identified Papal Rome as the central source of anti-Semitism in the world, and the rival eternal city to Jerusalem. He also stated that it was the destiny of the Jews to ultimately bring unity and blessing to mankind, but he erred in placing emphasis on Jewish genius rather than the hand of God as the means by which these things would be achieved. Hess took encouragement from the unification of Italy, which had severely curtailed the power of the papacy, believing that it augured well for the establishment of a new Jewish state in Palestine, under the patronage of other successful nationalistic movements. Little did he realize that the new Germany, then in formation around him, would, in the daylight of the 20th century, institute anti-Semitism excelling in depravity and scale in anything that the world had ever seen. The philanthropy of Hess, the Rothschilds, Charles Netter and others sponsored a trickle of Jews returning to Palestine, mainly to work the soil. By 1870, there were 9,000 Jews in Jerusalem, half the population of the city. Societies dedicated to the return sprang up in Romania and Russia. In 1881, the Lovers of Zion was formed, and soon there were numerous groups, some of which made the hazardous journey to Palestine. In 1882, a student movement, Belu, was formed with similar objectives. These groups had the alternative of either emigrating to the United States, where the material advantages were greater, but their roots in the land of Abraham prevailed. Also in 1882, a Russian Jew from Odessa, Leon Pinsker, being convinced of the impossibility of assimilation, traveled the continent supporting the idea of a national home. His book, Auto-Emancipation, had a considerable impact. In Germany and Austria, meanwhile, Jewish fortunes declined. Anti-Semitism thrived under Bismarck's administration. The 1873 stock market slump and the Panama Canal scheme failure were blamed directly on the Jews by the anti-Semitic press. Further to this, the Germans also elaborated the idea of racial superiority, which regarded Jews as inferior, mongrel stock. Richard Warner, the composer, espoused this view, and his daughter married a Britisher, Chamberlain, whose book, The Foundations of the 19th Century, was a blatantly distorted defense of the theory. Just as the Lovers of Zion movement was generated by pogroms in Russia, so political Zionism was born out of anti-Semitism in France. The catalyst was the Dreyfus case. Alfred Dreyfus, a French Jew and military officer, was accused of selling secrets to the Germans. He was tried and convicted of treason, then degraded and imprisoned. But the travesty of justice in his case eventually led to his retrial and exoneration. In the long process, the anti-Semitic hatred of the French population and press was revealed to a remarkable degree. Theodor Herzl, an Austrian Jew, was one of the journalists covering the case. Later he was caused to write. But the Dreyfus case contains more than a miscarriage of justice. It contains the wish of the vast majority in France to damn one Jew, and through him all Jews. Death to the Jews, the crowd yelled when they ripped the captain's stripes from his uniform. And since that time, down with the Jews has become a battle cry. Where? In France. In Republican, modern, civilized France, 100 years after the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The unknown Herzl did not initially have success in making contact with other Jews working for a return to Zion. Nevertheless, encouraged by Max Nordau, another newspaper correspondent, he wrote and published in 1896 a book entitled The Jewish State, in which he set forth a homeland in Palestine as the only solution to Jewish oppression. The book was strongly practical, dealing with most of the matters involved in such a bold enterprise, such as land acquisition, housing, employment, economics, and so on. I will make a dedicated video of extracts from his book next. Herzl's book created more internal Jewish controversy with assimilationists. The basic idea had been voiced in Jewish circles for 40 years, and there was anything but united support for it. But Providence was directing affairs to bring about the rebirth of a Jewish state, which would be a leading participant in the final resolution of the Rome-Jew struggle that had persisted for 2,000 years. Unconscious of the divine hand, Herzl forged ahead, maintaining optimism in the face of considerable opposition. He organized the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, on the 29th of August 1897, attended by Jews from 24 countries and locations. The Congress was a success, adopting a program to secure for the Jewish people in Palestine a publicly recognized, legally secured homeland. Herzl's diary entry revealed an amazing confidence. Were I to sum up the Basel Congress in a word, which I shall guard against pronouncing publicly, it would be this: at Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I said this out loud today, I would be answered by universal laughter. Perhaps in 5 years, and certainly in 50, everyone will know it. 50 years later, on the 29th of November 1947, after the worst Jewish persecution of all history, the United Nations organization voted in favor of the formation of a Jewish state. In the context of Jewish aspirations, the establishment of the Zionist Congress was a giant step forward, but it was only the first step. It is doubtful whether anyone deluded himself with the notion that the world powers, in all of whom Rome had found fertile soil for her anti-Semitic propaganda, would meekly accept and make arrangements for millions of Jews to take up residence in Palestine. The Turkish Sultan, in 1885, had already indicated his opposition to large-scale immigration to that region. But, as the Bible had caused John Thomas to foresee some 50 years before the Basel Congress, events would transpire causing Britain to appreciate the political desirability of assuming the sovereignty of the Holy Land and of promoting its colonization by the Jews. Those events, associated with World War I, would be a painful nature, although not as traumatic as the subsequent series of incidents that would see the rebirth of the nation in 1948, in spasms of anguish and blood. In the final stages, a state would have to be wrested forcibly even from British hands. At this time, around the turn of the 20th century, another cause was attracting the attention of Russian Jews: the overthrow of the Tsar regime through revolutionary socialism, which seemed to promise a new and better deal. Jews like Karl Marx, for example, had been instrumental in the socialist cause. But like all previous revolutions, the New Deal eventually turned out to be a cruel mirage. The proletariat was no different to the aristocracy insofar as anti-Semitism was concerned. In fact, it was more volatile and unpredictable. Nevertheless, for the time being, the Russian Jewish political organization, the Bund, sought and was granted association with the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party as an autonomous body. Meanwhile, widespread anti-Semitism continued. Even in Britain, antipathy towards Jewish immigration was such as to bring about, in 1902, a royal commission to investigate its effects. In Tsar-run Russia there was a massive increase in persecution. A blood libel charge led to a pogrom in Kishinev at Passover 1903, in which 49 Jews were killed, while the Tsar's troops stood idly by. Pogroms spread throughout Russia that same year, to which Jews in Odessa, including Vladimir Jabotinsky, responded by setting up a Jewish defense group. With the creation of an anti-Semitic movement known as the Black Hundreds, organized pogroms continued on through 1905 and 1906. In 1905 alone, over 800 Jews were murdered. With the increase in persecution, and in the absence of any charter for settlement in Palestine, Herzl proposed at the Sixth Zionist Congress in 1903 that a colony be set up under British protection in Uganda. In the face of determined support for Palestine and nowhere else, Herzl dropped the proposal. He died in 1904 without seeing his dream realized. Others filled his place. In 1907, fierce anti-Jewish riots occurred in Romania, giving further urgency to the Zionist movement. Emphasis was now being placed on action rather than legalities. Between 1904 and 1914, 25,000 Jews reached Palestine, bringing the total Jewish population to 100,000. Around the turn of the century, there arose another, sinister and malevolent factor that was to do untold damage to the Jewish cause, titled The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This slanderous forgery claimed to expose a worldwide Jewish conspiracy to dominate the globe and destroy so-called Christian institutions. First published in a newspaper in 1903 in St. Petersburg, it was published throughout Europe dozens of times prior to the Second World War. Although its origin was obscure and its authenticity was disproved in judicial courts, the credence given to it has testified to the fundamental anti-Semitism existing in 20th century civilization. In the 1920s it was published in London and also by Henry Ford in the United States. Today it remains a propaganda instrument of anti-Semites worldwide. As the world moved on towards World War I, it was abundantly clear that the ages of enlightenment, revolution and industrial progress had not eliminated anti-Semitism. In Western Europe, the Jew was still restricted in occupation and loathed as a member of society. In the East, persecutions were as bad as at any time in history. Things were somewhat better across the Atlantic in the New World, or America, which had received many Jews among the nationalities that had boosted the American population during the 19th century. The biggest change, however, was the emergence of the Zionist movement with a definite goal for a Jewish state in Palestine. An ideal with practical possibilities, it had stirred many people, including some non-Jews. Winston Churchill, British Under Secretary of State for the Colonies, gave his opinion in 1908 as follows. "I'm in full sympathy with the historical traditional aspirations of the Jews. The restoration to them of a center of true racial and political integrity would be a tremendous event in the history of the world. Jerusalem must be the only ultimate goal. When it will be achieved, it is vain to prophesy, but that it will someday be achieved is one of the few certainties of the future. And the establishment of a strong, free Jewish state, astride of the bridge between Europe and Asia, flanking the land roads to the east, would not be only an immense advantage to the British Empire, but a notable step towards the harmonious disposition of the world among its peoples." I'm unaware whether Churchill knew of the scriptural prophecies that had been so accurately expounded by John Thomas in connection with the restoration of the Jewish state and the role of Britain. If his convictions were based purely on political insight, then he was extremely astute. Whatever the case, it is clear that his government was quite conscious of the possibility of such a state emerging and of the potential advantages to Britain. Unfortunately, Britain's ulterior motive, that of serving her own interests, was to be productive of bad as well as good in the ensuing decades. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to get notifications of new videos. Like, share and comment below.